My name's Tom Boyson. I'm the moderator of the session. Very pleased to welcome you here, and thank you for your interest in this really important topic. Our panel today is very distinguished and has many perspectives. Let me go quickly through, starting with Elaine Wynn on the far end, who is a business leader, and beyond that is the national chairman of Communities in Schools, which is one of the largest dropout prevention recovery programs in the country, and is also the president of the Nevada State Board of Education. And then we have George Weiss, who is also a threefer in that he is a business leader, he is a philanthropist, and he's going to tell us later in the program, I'm sure, about Say Yes to Education, very interesting approach it has. And he's been a board member and very active at the University of Pennsylvania. Then we have Anna McCullough, who is a person who has invented a much more effective way of matching students with universities, among other things, to get them on the right track to be successful. And then we have Michael Lomax, who is an academic, a university professor, a president of a university, and currently CEO and president of UNCF, which is the organization in the country for getting resources and opportunities available to African American students to propel them through college. And on my immediate left is Stephen Knapp, who's the president of George Washington University and has, among other things, been one of the people present at the White House Summit on Higher Education, which took place in January and which addresses this issue. And we're going to start in a few minutes. I've asked each panelist to give us, because I'm going to go over some kind of gloomy news about the situation, and I want you all to see what's actually happening on the ground in each of these organizations. So they'll each have about 2 minutes to kind of put out what exciting things are happening with them. But if I'd like to see slide number 1, if I may. Are we equipped to put that up there? So what we see here, we're talking about achievement gaps here today, or in this readiness. This is just showing the contrast between low income and other students in 8th grade reading and in 8th grade math. How about slide 7? And this is going to show us, if you look at these are the performance quartiles. On the left side, you see the lower quartile. The 2 middle quartiles in the center and on the right side are the upper quartiles. So one thing that's interesting to me about this, and it tells a story, is that basically 30% of the high income, low scoring students are going to get a bachelor's degree, but only 30% of the high scoring low income. So the least able rich kids are getting there. The most able poor kids are not getting there. So we could see slide number 9, which is going to be very familiar to you because we see this persistent relationship between unemployment and education level. Obviously, you have your bachelor's degree, you're way better, more likely to be employed than if you dropped out of high school. Slide 10, I think, is telling in that it's showing us you add 1 year of college to the region's workforce, and you get a per capita jump of 17.4%. So this is, it's a moral and a political issue of equal opportunity, which we're so committed to in our country. It's also an economic workforce development big time issue. And finally, slide 13, which is showing the increase in poverty between 2000 and 2011. So we have now we went from 4 to 17 states where more than half of the students are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. So this problem and this challenge is getting bigger. So I'd like to go to these kind of our 2-minute blitz of good news, or you can even give bad news, because the panel has been encouraged to disagree whenever possible, because we don't expect to come out with any kind of consensus here. This is an issue which has been going on. If you go back to 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and the money that's been pumped into K-12 education to get kids ready, especially low-income kids ready to succeed. You go to the Pell Grants of the 1970s. Now we have 4 decades of spending really hundreds of millions, I'm sure billions of dollars on this issue. And many people have benefited from it, but we haven't solved the problem, but are we even making progress? So Elaine Wynn, in your work, whether it's with communities and schools or the Nevada State Board of Education or whatever, maybe you could give us some insight about what seems to be working for you and what you see in the field.
Well, before I talk about what's working, I'd like to just put this in a little bit more context. Traditionally, I have been concerned for many decades about the at-risk student population, which brought me to communities and schools to begin with. And a generation ago, what we were consumed with was the challenge of high school graduation. And all of us would be repeatedly alarmed at terrible dropout rates in high school and the failure to produce enough candidates to go on to college who are members of that population most direly in need of higher education. Now, because the skills required for most of our jobs are requiring some form of post-secondary training or career and technical training, it's even more important that we graduate kids from those institutions. So we're taking the issue and expanding it, and it's now becoming more of a cradle-to-grave issue than just pre-K or K through 12. And I think that clearly this is not something easy to determine, but if you view this issue of poverty in its ugliest form, this is the single most pervasive problem we have. The challenges that children have, and I'll just show you this one slide, and it's 23. And it shows a young student. He's trying to get to math class, and he's asking for help, and look at the luggage he's got. He's got homelessness and all other kinds of things that are weighing him down. Why do we think that that goes away when they graduate high school? It doesn't. Those kinds of things can continue on. And even, I'll get into greater detail about other things that have to do with it, and also when we address policy. The good news is that we're all pretty much focused on this now, and we understand that intervening early on, not waiting until high school and college to correct this, is really the way to go. So all those organizations and agencies that are dedicated on addressing the core issue of poverty are the things that deserve more support and focus, and unfortunately get the least amount of support.
Elaine, thank you very much. George, what's important in this situation to you?
Thanks, Tom. Firstly, let me start off with a statistic. 24.8% of kids from the worst part of the inner cities have mental health issues. How in the world are you going to expect these kids to succeed unless you solve that basic problem? Let me tell you and I know this is going to be a very interesting panel. We'll be able to address a lot of different issues, but let me just briefly spend some time on Say Yes to Education. And the Say Yes to Education is in its 27th year. We have 65,000 kids in our program. And as any businessman would do, is we kept looking at the model, and now what we have is a citywide model. And it's a very holistic approach where we've taken on the cities of Buffalo and Syracuse, New York, and we're about to take on 2 other cities to expand that to potentially from 65,000 to 250,000 kids. And the first thing we do is we go into these cities, and any parent that has a kid in the public school system, we give them free legal aid. So taking that pressure off the family. Then what we do is we hire a social worker for each of the schools, and we implement a student monitoring program. that if the social worker doesn't know what's going on with the kid and with the family, it is really hard, okay, to address the problems. You can't look, I think Elaine alluded to it, you can't look back 4 or 6 years later and say what went wrong. You have to attack the issue when it occurs. We come in, we have the first criteria of these cities, you have to put aside all your political BS. The teachers unions and the teachers unions redo their contracts, the Teamsters union contracts. We, for the first 4 or 5 years, will pay for an extended school day and an extended school year. We have all the different programs, not only the mental health clinics in every school, we have health clinics that we disperse around the cities to help the families better their health care. We do the after-school programs, but equally important, okay, which is very apropos for this, this panel, is that starting at their end of their sophomore year, most people know the guidance departments in the inner city are god-awful. And so what we do is we sort of take on that role, and we help these kids, thinking about different colleges that, would be, applicable to their skill level. We work with them, their SATs, filling out financial aid forms. But then equally important is we partner with 64 private colleges throughout the United States, which basically offer our kids free tuition. And they include the 8 Ivy League schools, Pomona out here, Duke, Northwestern, Georgetown, some really great schools. And the importance of that, it gives the kids hope. And that's what these kids need more than anything else. In Syracuse, the chief of police said that juvenile crime is down 50%. And and it literally, because the kids, have a choice. So that partnership, but then that partnership includes, which I think is also important for this panel, is for a university or a college to partner with us. What we insist on is a mentoring program at that school, okay, and support systems, because it doesn't do any good to have, trumpet how many kids are going to college. How many of those kids end up graduate? And I'll leave you with this one comment, is the data that I've seen, and it's another area of discussion, but most of the data we get from the inner city is frankly a crock. Okay, that's not, these numbers are usually, really not believable. And but the national numbers I've seen are 68% of kids from all walks of life, okay, continue their college education. In Syracuse, because of these mentoring systems, 90% of our kids in private colleges in the last 3 years have stayed at that college to continue their education.
That's great.
Okay.
Anna, tell us about your insight on this college gap situation.
Great. Well, I'm so impressed by the programs here, and in fact, one of the things that I'm excited to do is to share with you what we do with Quest Bridge, which is similar in some ways to the College Compact that we just heard about. But Quest Bridge actually has a partnership and has created an online platform for highly talented low-income students from all over the country. So you can be anywhere. Actually, you can be anywhere in the world, but primarily our students are Americans, and they can apply online for free to 35 of the best colleges in the country. So that includes schools like MIT and Princeton and Yale and Stanford and so forth. And if our students get into our partner schools, they get a full 4-year scholarship, or nearly that, nearly a full 4-year scholarship. So right now, Quest Bridge has, just last year, got 1,600 students into our partner schools. And over the 4 years of school, of freshman through senior year, we have about 5,000 Quest Scholars in our schools. We know, however, that there's many more out there, including in some of the cities that we're talking about here. And so one of the things that we're excited about is our reach, the fact that we have students from all over the country, and that our schools do provide such generous financial aid. But one of our new innovations this upcoming year is to actually open up our application and our platform to sort of thoughtful Americans and companies and foundations and others to help us find more of these students and to help them to get access to these excellent opportunities. The other thing that we learned by analyzing our Quest Scholars and our Quest Scholar applicants is that students who apply to Quest, even if they don't get into our partner schools, end up doing very well in the college application process. And that's partly because of this education, sort of reaching out to them a little bit earlier, and our application is also has earlier timing, and it's designed to bring out the best in low-income students. So we've tried to build a platform that actually can be very useful to our partner colleges, but also useful to America to try to, again, help and find these students who are truly qualified for great schools and help them to reach those goals.
Thank you. Michael Lomax, I noted your biography does not include one of your distinctions, which is I think you were named in January by President Obama to serve on a commission that is going to look at the opportunities for especially African American students in going forward. As you look at a situation we're talking about today, what stands out for you?
Well, you know, I keep thinking of, first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm glad that the Milken Institute is taking on this issue. And just left the panel that was dealing with K through 12. And I guess if I were to say one thing, a whole lot of innovation has happened in K through 12 over the last couple of decades. It has been a laboratory for big ideas that have challenged old ideas, and we see things beginning to happen which are changing outcomes for low-income kids. You know, at the end of World War II, GIs returned, and with the GI Bill, middle-class Americans believed that a college education was something they had to pursue, and they could and should pursue it. GI Bill didn't have that same impact for African Americans, Native Americans, and Latinos. But today, because of what is happening in K through 12, there is the expectation, I see Eli brought out, Eli, there is an expectation that low-income kids can and should go to college. Demand is there. But there is something horrible about that slide that was up there that said that a high-performing, low-income kid does everything right, is college-ready, has less of a chance of graduating from college than a low-performing, high-income kid. The revolution needs to come to higher education. It hasn't come here yet. Very complacent. We have the best higher education system in the world. We don't need to change. Well, there's something wrong with it when a low-income, high-performing kid has a less of a chance of graduating than a high-income, low-performing kid does. And the reason kids don't have the same opportunities is that the system just doesn't work. Now, I'm going to tell my good friend, Brother President, that the #1 reason the system doesn't work is that financial aid is totally screwed up in this country. Totally. Give me a hand on that one. Financial aid is screwed up. Pell Grants buy less today than they bought 50 years ago. And every year they buy even less because the price of education keeps going up. And the only way a high-performing, low-income kid can get an education outside of some wonderful elites, those Ivy League institutions that are giving those they represent 15% of their students are low-income kids. We're not going to solve this problem at Harvard and Yale. We're going to solve it in community colleges, in historically black colleges, in minority-serving institutions, in open enrollment institutions all across this country, and it doesn't work there because federal financial aid doesn't work, and because these kids don't know how to cobble together the financial aid program which will take the place of income so that they can actually go to school, pay tuition, and enable them to do that without going into huge debt. I want to give you one. I think the news is bad, and we need to be mad as hell, and we need to change it. Right now, more kids are looking at not going to four-year publics in this country, low-income kids. They're going to proprietary institutions because they think that they can get that education there, and they're winding up, going into these career proprietary institutions, taking on huge debt, not completing. So the system is broken in America today. It needs a revolution. We've got to get up off our complacency and challenge this country to change. And I think it's only going to change if we get business and philanthropy to do in colleges and universities what they've been doing in K through 12, and that is to disrupt and innovate.
Thank you. And Stephen, as president of George Washington University, you were present in January at the White House Higher Education Summit. Is that right?
Yes.
So I'm going to just kind of tick off the points that were discussed there when President Obama and the First Lady brought together many of the leaders from higher education. And the focus there was on 4 different things. I've got 3 of them here. Maybe you can remember one. Connecting more low-income students to the college that is right for them and ensuring that more students graduate. That's a connection. 2, increasing the pool of students preparing for college through early intervention efforts. 3, leveling the playing field in college advising and test preparation, seeking breakthroughs in remedial education. Those are the 3 that I have. Maybe there was a 4th one, but maybe you could address yourself to that and to the point of how important are these things, and also what got left out there.
Yeah, thanks very much, and I also appreciate being on this panel. I think it's great we have such a diversity of perspectives here. It's not all university administrators, and it's not all just educators, but it's a wide range. And I would say that the most important thing we're doing right now is partly inspired by the summit that you mentioned, and it's to try to give a much stronger, more coherent, more strategic focus to a range of initiatives that have evolved over many years, but they've been disparate, they've been sort of ad hoc. I'll give a few examples. We've had now for about 20 years a scholarship program that gives a full ride scholarship to graduates of DC schools. And those students graduated at a rate of about 90%. These scholarships cover everything. They're everything from tuition, room and board, books and pencils, the whole gamut. And in fact, the best thing I do every year is go into high school classrooms and surprise the winners of these scholarships. And what's especially gratifying about that is it's not just that the students themselves and their families who are kind of waiting in the wings to surprise them and then come into the classroom. It's not just that they're thrilled by what's occurred, but all their fellow students burst into applause when this happens. And we're doing this partly to inspire the students who aren't necessarily the winners of our scholarships to see college in their future and to see the possibility of obtaining student aid, not necessarily from us, but from wherever they can obtain it. What we're trying to do now is to supplement that with a much more active engagement in the schools, helping families understand how to go about putting together those packages of support that Dr. Lomax was just referring to. So that's one piece of it. We're also, we went several years ago to a fixed tuition program where tuition never goes up after the first year, and we understand from surveys that that's been especially important to families from lower income groups, but also who were perhaps first generation students. They particularly appreciate having that certainty of knowing how much it's going to cost because of the combination of tuition and student aid, so they won't have to be surprised 1 or 2 years into their college experience. So we've got that going on. Recently, we've started articulation programs much more aggressively with community colleges. So we have a program where our School of Nursing makes it possible for any graduate of a community college anywhere in the Commonwealth of Virginia to complete a bachelor's degree and do most of that online. Part of that's to keep the primary care capacity in the rural communities so people don't have to leave town to come to a nursing school where they often end up staying because they become connected with that hospital. We're doing similar things in STEM fields with community colleges. And finally, we have a very active outreach program increasingly to veterans. But these have been initiatives that have kind of evolved in parallel. What we haven't really done is focus them as powerfully as I think we need to do on the intersection, and this I think goes directly to what Dr. Lomax was just talking about, the intersection of the access question with the student success question, because that I think has been the neglected kind of secret to this problem from the point of view of universities. Obviously, there are many, many dimensions of it, but we've tended to focus either on preparation in high school or on ways of recruiting, attracting and recruiting students, preparing them to go to the universities, but we haven't been as focused as we should be, I think, on all the systems that need to be in place to support students to make sure they succeed once they get there. I think what's going to emerge from this panel as the most notorious and important slide is that slide number 7, which has already been pointed to a couple of times, and that's the one that shows that the highest achieving lower income students graduate at just about the same rate as the lowest achieving higher income students. And another way to think about this problem of success and how it's actually in some ways kind of been the hidden secret from the point of view of universities is to look at the differential rates of ethnic groups in terms of college attendance and college completion. So in 2012, about 2/3 of high school graduates ended up going to college somewhere. And those numbers were pretty close across ethnic differentiations. In fact, white students were right on that number, 66%. Hispanic students, interestingly, were a little bit higher at about 70%, and African American students a little lower, about 58%. But when you look at the completion rates, it's a very different story. White students graduated at just about the same rate, about maybe a little bit lower, 62, 63%. But Hispanic students dropped down to 51%, African American students down to 40%. So it's the students we're losing once they arrive, and I think it goes back to one of the things that Elaine was saying, that the challenges they've had to overcome to get into college don't disappear once they get to college. We need stronger mentoring programs. We need stronger cohort approaches, which and members of this panel have been focused on those approaches. There are a range of things we need to do. So what I did immediately after going to that White House summit was to put together a university-wide task force to take all those different pieces, all those different programs, and say, let's have a concerted effort to put them together and understand the nexus of access and success, so we have a kind of seamless approach to this, and also reach down into the communities, again, to help families apply for colleges, prepare for colleges, get financial aid, whether they come to our university or where else they go, because we're not going to solve the problem. You know, the small segment of not-for-profit private universities, elite universities, are a small part of the overall national picture, as has already been mentioned.
So I want to just say that the fourth element in the summit was remedial education. And then I want to invite, and I think that's why I see a few hands here, comment on the White House summit and these 4 priorities: connecting the low-income students to the colleges, increasing the pool of students preparing for college, leveling the playing field in college advising and test preparation, and for remedial education. And Michael, I think I saw your hand first.
You know, look, I went to the White House summit, and you know, I think it's great for the president to use the bully pulpit. Let's just acknowledge why they had a White House summit, though. They had a White House summit to point to things that they could do without going to Congress to make the changes that they have to make. And so it's really tinkering around the edges. And as much as I was delighted to be there, always happy to see the president and the first lady, you know, they were raising the white flag. They were saying, you know, we've given up on any big changes over the next 2 years, and we're just going to try to, you know, highlight some nice things that we can do. And I think, you know, there were great places there that were talking about the great things they're doing. Let me tell you one great thing we've been doing since 1999 in a partnership with Bill and Melinda Gates. If you go back to 1999, most people thought that low-income, high-performing kids of color couldn't go to elite institutions and graduate. And Bill and Melinda Gates put up first $1 billion, and then after that $600 million. So they've invested $1.6 billion in an initiative to prove that when you remove the financial barrier from the pathway of low-income, high-performing kids, they will not just do as well as those high-income kids, they will do better. They have these kids who do this program, we've 17,000 to date, there will be 20 when the program ends, have a 90% graduation rate. And they don't go to just any old place. You know, we're sending more of those kids to Harvard, to Stanford, to the University of Texas, the University of California, than anybody else. And this is African American, Native American, Asian Pacific Islander, and who else is left out?
Latinos.
Latinos. Mm-hmm. So I mean, this is, you know, this is the most challenged. These are first generation, and what we have demonstrated is you remove the financial barrier, but it's not just the financial barrier. You've got to give them support, because these kids have got to learn to navigate often a hostile environment. So to your point, we got to find the right schools, because some of these schools actually don't want these kids. They actually say to them, you know, people like you shouldn't be, this isn't meant for people like you. You're not supposed to be studying, often to women, not supposed to be studying science, technology, engineering, and math. So we've got to change the institutions. But I would say we've had a big impact on elite institutions. I think elite institutions get it. If they've got a lot of money in their endowment, they're now using a part of it to help low-income kids go to college. But we're not talking about just the highest performing low-income kids if we're really going to solve this problem. We're talking about kids from Appalachia. We're talking about kids from that are, they've done pretty well. And gosh, they could do pretty much better if they could get a college degree. They will be the first in their families. And when you get a kid to graduate from college, you don't just change her life, you change the trajectory of the whole family. You change the community. So what we've got to figure out is how to help the pretty good kids. Not the greatest of the kids. We've got to help the pretty good kids become better. And I think that's where we're failing. Some places are doing a better job than others. The University of California system, almost 50% of their kids are low income. That's incredible. But how hard is it to get in there? That's the highest performing kids. But it's at community colleges where the graduation rates are in the teens. It's it's at HBCUs where 70% of our students are low income. We have about a 37% graduation rate. We need more financial aid for those kids and more supports.
George, I think, did you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, when you talk about the White House initiative, these are very deep problems. Some of them can be solved by money. And I'm not as optimistic as you are, Michael. I was an advisor to senior President Bush almost 30 years ago, and other than the charter school movement, I haven't seen great progress. Okay, and I'm not saying there aren't some exciting things going out there, but I don't see that inner city kid getting a much better education than they did 30 years ago. But one thing that can be solved, okay, and I think it's somewhat separate at different institutions. The problem for the White House initiative, those are difficult problems that have been around. When you talk about the kids, matriculating, and Steve alluded to this, it's not the number of kids matriculating at college, it's the number of kids, graduating college. And but when there's enough evidence, and as business leaders and philanthropists and educators, okay, we should be able to do a better job in making sure these kids, stay in school. When you look at the Posse Foundation, okay, what they do, which is very intensive, the data that I indicated earlier, that 90%, okay, if you work with the population, okay, and I'm not saying it's easy, but the kids have achieved. The one thing that people probably don't realize is that when kids come from the backgrounds, okay, that Elaine alluded to, is the first sign of difficulty. Without the support system, they revert to the street. I can't tell you how many kids that I've had to pull off the streets, okay, that started dealing again, that were in college, because they can't handle adversity. But the thing is, if we work with these kids, mentor them, and set up these support programs, this should be the easiest of the problems to solve.
Elaine, and then Anna.
Yeah, I think the frustrating thing is the concept of scale. We hear a lot about best practices, and I have to say that one of my great heroes is sitting right next to me. And in my travels with communities and schools, where we are in 26 states, I get to go around to lots of places and visit and absorb what's going on there. And the model that I think seems to be the most impactful is the one that George champions. And that's where local communities and states take responsibility for what's going on in their local area. And they pull together all of the resources that exist, and they hold one another accountable. If we could bottle George, although I know he's expanding to 2 more cities, his model is the one that I think is the single most impressive one, because he does take on and deal with all the issues that have been discussed here. What we have to understand is that the federal government doesn't do very much for anything, and they can be a great bully pulpit and cause consciousness to be raised for these issues, one of which should be a change in mindset in America, that the children that we're dealing with, it's not just a matter of their being poor, they are damaged. The trauma that occurs in the lives of these young people is not just the obvious things of not having money for stuff, but they're witness to horrific things. Many of them see murder and rape in their own environments, and this scars them psychologically, and it impacts their ability to even learn if they get in the right environment. So you can say that we've given them all of the financial support to put them in a new institution with good teachers and better conditions, but they have had conditions ingrained in them that have affected their capacity to learn. Now, the good news is Paul Tough, who wrote a book about how children succeed, which was a wonderful study, suggests that you can intervene in this terrible path of children by injecting caring adults in their lives. So when you have programs that take advantage of all the things we're talking about, but you are certain to put adults with them who can say, I care about you, I know your name, I'm going to be there for you. And yes, you're going to have times when you're challenged and faltered, and it will be difficult, but give me a call. In all the high schools and places where communities and schools exist, we have those facilitators who not only coordinate the programs, but they become that lifesaver. They become that very real human being that cares about that child in the absence of a working parent. And in many cases, the parents themselves are trained and taught new skills of how to nurture and help their children along. The things that make kids successful today, especially children of poverty, is developing those social skills of persistence and self-reliance and stick-to-itiveness, because they don't have that coat that they need to take to school when they got into a school where, fortunately, they're able to begin an academic career. But it's daunting for them when they've got a pack and they don't have clothes, they don't have shoes. And so there have to be those organizations that are there to fill in the blanks, to make them whole again, to at least be on a competitive footing. And I see evidence of that happening in Kalamazoo, in Charlotte, certainly in Syracuse, in Buffalo, and I'm happy to say Los Angeles, despite the political stuff that goes on here. If the leadership comes from the philanthropic side, I mean, Mr. Broad is just the king of education reform. He has picked on all the areas of innovation, and you know, he is the guru. Every time I want to know what to do about a problem, I look up and see what has Eli done. And so innovation is clearly called for here, but it comes from this combination of the public and private sector, and there's no substitute for leadership. And that's why the people up here are so terrific, and they should go out on a tour.
Anna?
Yeah, so in our program, we have actually a college-level set of services called the Quest Scholars Network, and we actually have partnerships with our schools, and our students come together and have these sort of groups where they actually can support each other. And one of the things we've learned from them, which is very compelling, is that while on the one hand they actually have very similar backgrounds to what you're describing, our students have an average income of about $31,000 a family, and they definitely come from these very hard backgrounds, and over 70% of them are first gen to college. We also want to position them as, in some ways, sharing with them that yes, they have lots of stress and they need to support each other, and they need to go to their campuses and get more resources. And the schools that support Quest Scholars tend to be extremely supportive when they know what the students need. But on the other hand, we will also want to position them as saying some of the things that you've been through in your life actually can be helpful for your success in your future. So one of the things that we talk about a lot in the Quest office is around this concept of grit and resilience. And even though you can't, even though they have problems and even though it's hard, and I agree that when they hit sort of a roadblock, sometimes one of the things that they don't have as much experience with is actually going out to ask for help. So we actually try to encourage them to say, look, there's a lot of people who do care, and it's our job as an organization also to help them find mentors. But we also want to say, look, the strengths that you built in the process of growing up in these really hard situations are actually going to set you up for success in business if you can sort of move forward and kind of believe in yourselves. And I think that message is really important to our students, because they already feel at a disadvantage at these schools in some ways. They already feel like they don't necessarily belong, or that the person next to them has no idea what they've grown up with or have no clue what they've been through. So kind of reinforcing to them that it's really their strength in many ways that will, and their own strength, their intrinsic strength, that will get them through, plus the services that we try to provide and that other community support tries to provide. I think that's a really key message that we've learned over the years can lead to very powerful outcomes. And our students do graduate at the same rate that our college's average students do overall. So they do end up doing quite well.
I want to focus for a minute on money and accountability. May we have slide 11, please, which is needing to work is the most common reason young adults have for leaving school. So you see that a number of these deal with money. And then if we could go to slide 19, it's showing what's happened in the Pell Grant program. And the way I read this graph between 2006 and 2011-12 is the spending on Pell Grants went up about 160%. The number of recipients went up about 80%. The average grant amount, maybe it's like low 20%. So the government, the federal government investment in college success has been very significant over 40 years, Pell Grants and loans. And there's a couple of aspects to this. What accountability exists at the level of the institutional level and at the level of the student for getting results based on this big investment? Is either of you, I think we were talking earlier about students. I don't know.
One comment to make about it, I think in general, one of the things we suffer from in higher education and the way it's approached in this country is an almost exclusive focus on inputs and almost no focus on outputs. And I mean, and you see that everything from US News rankings, all the measures except alumni giving. It's probably the only one that's not an input measure. Most of them are measures of institutional wealth. You know, it's how much faculty are paid. It's the size of endowment. So it's issues of that kind. And so what we don't really look at is, and I think the same thing happens with some of these programs which provide funding but no way of tracking and no, as you say, no system of accountability. Now I think institutions, partly under pressure from accreditors and so on, are starting to pay more attention to that. Obviously the White House has ramped up some of the rhetoric about wanting to look at outcomes, but we haven't really found, I think, a compelling way to do that applies across the board that we can actually use in the kind of dialogue with, for example, faculty and others, so we can really build these systems. You know, I worry about, we touched a little bit about on the environments from which our students come. We haven't said very much about the environments in which they find themselves once they arrive at these institutions. We've touched on it a little bit. For example, the very, I think, searching analysis by Claude Steele, former provost of Columbia, who's now just been appointed Executive Vice Chancellor at the University of California, Berkeley, into what he calls stereotype threat. And this is the effects of actually the educational environment on students once they arrive that actually degrades their performance after they get there, even if they have a high level of preparation beforehand. I don't think that universities have been as searching or as strategic or as systematic, really, in looking at the factors within the educational environments they are themselves producing. And I think that's related to this problem of performance related to Pell Grants, that the fact that students come with Pell Grants is great. It enables some 9 million students to go to college who might not be able to go otherwise. But what happens once they get there is not something that's really very carefully or systematically tracked.
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, the department, the administration is now talking accountability in higher education when it doesn't have the ability to enforce anything. You know, they brought accountability into K through 12, and they said we're going to race to the top and innovation fund, and we're only going to make this available to school systems that are prepared to demonstrate the outcomes and hold themselves accountable to certain kinds of things. To do that, they had to get Congress to agree. Well, Congress and the White House aren't talking about anything. They're not going to talk about anything for 2 years. So all they can now point to is really some promising practices that they see at some institutions, but they really can't create a demonstration at a national level to say, how are these investments that we're making? Huge dollars in Pell, huge. I mean, you know, they've done a lot in K through 12 where they don't really spend I mean, they're not the primary funders of K through 12. Local governments are, but they've leveraged the funds that they have to have impact there. They're the biggest funder of college and university, and they're not leveraging that because Congress won't talk to the administration. They won't agree on what to do. So that an institution that has a 5% or a 2% graduation rate gets to give Pell Grants just like an institution that has a 90% graduation rate. An institution that any student can borrow up to the maximum and use that for, I mean, if I borrow, I can use that to pay the house note, the car note, It's not limited just to educational. And that's why a lot of these students overborrow, because they use this as a way of paying for life. So I would say that these are not the most efficient programs, and they need to be looked at very carefully. They do some very good things, but the reality is that a lot of the kids who get these Pell Grants don't ever graduate, and a huge number of kids who get debt are overwhelmed by the ability to repay it. The only debt program that they have actually tried to make some changes in is a program called Parent Plus, where they have limited parents who have had debt during a recession, you know, and didn't maybe pay a bill. They've limited them from being able to borrow, and it is the program with the lowest default rate. It has a 3.9% default rate, and they put more restrictions on who can use it. So I think that many of the administration has done good stuff in K through 12. They have not been as thoughtful and as innovative, and that's why I think over the short term we're going to have to rely upon philanthropy and business to come up with some big ideas and help us determine where are the places that we can have the most impact and do what needs to happen, which is, to your point, is to scale this. Because if it happens at a couple of elite universities, great, we know it works. But Posse program is affecting thousands of students. We're talking about millions of students whose outcomes have got to change.
So where do these ideas come from? We're having a midterm election in 2014. We're going to elect a president in 2016. I think the points that have been made about gridlock and sequestration and so forth really have handicapped the current situation. Where do the new ideas come from? I mean, we have business leaders in here and with political influence and so forth. Give them a job.
Well, I think it's already been said. It's really not. I came away from that. My main takeaway from the White House summit was there's an infinite number of best practices.
Yeah,
that's great. I mean, you know, everybody came and shared best practices. There are a dozen per institution. There isn't, and I think Michael's really put his finger on it. There's no way of picking something and running with it because there's no mechanism for. You know, it's not like you can establish a standard of care. I mean, if you look at medical care, we do research, we figure out outcomes, we establish standards of care, and then those become universal because there's a mechanism for doing that. There's no way of doing that. There's no way of scaling these practices, and I think that is the problem. So I can point to lots of great things I think our faculty are thinking of and doing. We have no end of new ideas, but how do you actually establish any kind of model and then have the capacity to scale it? And I think this idea of involving business and philanthropy and pulling together whatever we could pull together strategically would be better than what we've got now, which is absolutely no strategy.
I want to make one final point, and that is that this is an American problem. It's not a Democrat problem. It's not a Republican problem. It's not a white problem. It's not a black problem. It is an American problem. And until this country figures out how to address American problems as Americans who can look different, believe differently, but can find some things that we can work together on, we're not going to solve this problem because we are so fractionalized. And if a Republican says it's day, a Democrat's going to say it's night. And until we figure it out that we agree on, there are just some things that we're not going to allow to be fragmented and pull us apart and stand together, we are not going to solve this, and we are not going to compete globally in the 21st century with a workforce that has the kinds of skills that we're going to see other countries producing. They're going to eat our lunch while we're so busy having our own food fight.
Elaine.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we should leave on a downer.
That was a challenge.
It's a challenge, and I'll just add a little bit more to the downer and then try and make an optimistic summary. If you want to talk about fragmentation, let's talk about Common Core standards and how this was a program that grew out of a governor's coming together and convening, has been torqued into believing that it is a federal program, which it absolutely is not, except for some funding attached to a bit of it. And you will find Democrats and Republicans on both sides of the Common Core debate. So to try and get this country to be on the same field with regard to policy is a huge and kind of ridiculous challenge, unfortunately. We are a people that are crisis-oriented. And I think, I'm here with my partner, Steve Wynn, who was part of everything we've done together in education in Nevada. And whenever things have come up and it starts to get dire, we say when it starts to hurt badly enough, we're going to figure out how to solve it. And I think that the evidence of that is what's taking shape in the various communities and cities across the country. And that's where we have to look to, our own efforts and resilience in the pockets of places where we have resources and can show the way. You hate to say, well, it's best practices replicated all over the place, but the best practices are pretty good. And I think if we use those as guides and we can, stimulate some more alarm, and we understand that the changing demographics in this country with our expanding Latino population, our minorities will become the majorities. They are the poorest citizens, and they are the poorest educated citizens. We have no choice but to educate this group of people.
All right.
So, George, what is your thinking about the further regulation around the Pell Grants and the way that universities are performing for this population of low-income students?
Well, I can't really speak for the universities. We have some distinguished panelists that can talk for about that. But what Stephen what Stephen talked about is correct. When you talk about accountability in these different programs, okay, where the people are taking some of the loans that Michael talked about and using it to pay off car loans or whatever. Okay, there has to be some accountability. Now, grant that Washington's not going to pour money into anything. The problem is if they utilize their resources better. But I'll tell you, Elaine and I were in a panel, a few weeks ago, a White House panel out here in LA, and there was a lot of focus on child trends, okay, which talked about integrated support systems for kids. And somebody asked me the question, okay, what would you do, to make a difference? The first thing I'd do, and there were 4 members of the White House in the front row, I'd keep the politicians out of it. You take this panel, okay, you take businessmen, you take philanthropists, you take educators that care, and parents, and we can solve a lot of these problems. The difficulty is we know Washington isn't working. Let's get rid of the politicians. Let's take this panel and get us solving the problems.
All right.
Okay. Any other, I wanted to ask Elaine about, and others, we just have a few minutes, but state level initiatives. Is Nevada doing anything? Has it done anything that was really useful?
Well, we have the 5th largest school district in the country in Las Vegas. Many people don't know that. And I thought, well, goodness, I'm president of the state board, and I'm going to get communities and schools right in a good position and maybe get some state funding and, get my little piece of the pie there. We are so overwhelmed taking care of the core business of running schools in a state that I'm almost embarrassed and ashamed to bring it up. When you deal with a district that is still overcrowded and can't seat 20,000 children because we don't pass a bond issue to build more schools, and the citizens are demanding smaller class sizes. So if we hire more teachers, where the heck are we going to put them? You are preoccupied with your core business, so you can't even get to the luxury of dealing with the quality issues. And that's been a huge awakening for me. But the good news is 2 of the members of our state board are Teach for America alumni. And they come to the game with such extraordinary knowledge and grassroots experience and new ideas, and having been in the field, knowing what kids experience, as opposed to some of the local school boards. We all love local school boards, but they become bastions of inactivity, or even worse, they block everything that you try to do. And so it's a fascinating time where our state is in a transition where our state board is getting more authority to deal with standards and assessments and accountability and college and career tests. So I can't even think about interventions except as a philanthropist doing the work that we do at home in Las Vegas with our innovative programs where we've joined Teach for America and CIS together in a pilot program. So I'm not prevented from being involved, but I can't do it from a policy level yet. Now, when our state starts to kick in some more money and our resources improve, maybe we can put in a little request in the budget to expand communities and schools. But so far, we're doing well on our own.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the members of the panel. Very interesting discussion. Thank you for being here. And let's have a round of applause.